Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Mike Shelby.
All right. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Out Front. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Reminder, today is the last day of me streaming this show on this channel. Starting on Monday, I'm going to be over at the Out Front channel. It's youtube.com/Outfront with Mike Shelby. All one word, no spaces. Also, the podcast version can be found on all major platforms under Out Front with Mike Shelby. First of all, happy Friday to everybody. There's no shout out of the day, no shout down of the day. Just a kind of a recap on what's been going on from a strategic perspective. We start off with this recent speech from Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell. So in this morning's early morning report over at Forward Observer, we do a daily report, goes out by 9 a.m. Central Time every morning. Troy had a note in there that I'm going to mention here. Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell gave a speech yesterday in which he admitted that the trend of globalization may reverse. And that's something that we've expected. We've been talking about that for weeks, if not a month or longer. And this is something that Larry Fink said. This is something that Larry Fink runs BlackRock, something like $10 trillion in assets under management. This is something Howard Marks from Oak Tree Capital said. And it's now making its way to the Federal Reserve here. Powell said that the U.S. economy likely would not remain similar to the economy we had pre-COVID, and that he is not sure what this new economy is going to look like. Now, on that note, Stephanie Kelton, who is probably the best known proponent for modern monetary theory, done shows on that in the past, like in the past couple of years, maybe next week I'll do a whole show on modern monetary theory. But she was on Bloomberg this morning talking about how Bretton Woods is still relevant. You may recall I talked about the great Zoltan Posar, who was talking about how this is Bretton Woods 3 that's happening right now, and the result of Bretton Woods 3 will remake the global financial system. He says we're basically moving away from the dollar because there are going to be competitor currencies in the East that will now give the dollar a run for its money. Well, Stephanie Kelton said, essentially, there's no reason to worry. Bretton Woods is still relevant. The United States just needs to continue to use Bretton Woods to improve, and that we should. She didn't say this exactly, but effectively she said we can run modern monetary theory on Bretton Woods. And so apparently some people have not yet arrived at the conclusion. Maybe that's denial or wishful thinking. I don't know, but there are some people who still believe that everything is okay, that the United States and the U.S.-led rules-based international system is not under attack or not under threat. We know that's not the case because it is under threat. But listen, this stuff this stuff doesn't happen immediately. It's not an overnight process. It's a years-long, probably potentially decades-long process. And this is why I talk about gray zone warfare so much, because China and Russia, and China's trying to use the BRICS countries. This is gray zone warfare, right? I mean, they're not bombing the United States. They're undermining the certain pillars of U.S. influence, whether that's diplomatic, that's financial and economic, military strength. I'll talk a bit more about what China is doing in the South Pacific with the Solomon Islands, which Max has been covering for the past couple of weeks. But all this stuff it's Chinese gray zone warfare. And that's why my social media handles are Gray Zone Warlord, because that's where all the fighting is right now. It's happening in the gray zone. We're not talking about conventional warfare yet. And it's certainly a lot more than just peaceful international competition. And it is what happens in the gray zone, what's happening in the gray zone right now is going to alter the world dramatically this decade. As always, we will continue to analyze these shifting geopolitical developments and the really shifting economic landscape here over at Forward Observer. And we do that to keep our readers ahead of the curve of change. And you can read our daily intel briefs by joining Forward Observer at forwardobserver.com/subscribe. By the way, I think we should have a few minutes for Q&A, so be sure to put your questions into the chat and I will get to them. By the way, let's talk about Ilhan Omar here for a second. Does anyone know where she is? I didn't know where she was until I read this, but we have this new terminal that gives us real-time looks at what's happening all across the country and conditions all across the world. And I noticed that the Indian press is having a minor freakout because they're reporting that Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota, is in Pakistan right now. She'll be there for the next 2 days. She's been there already for a day or two because the Pakistanis flew her to the border, to the Jammu and Kashmir region, which is called the line of control. They flew her there, and Pakistani security officials gave her a kind of a tour of what was happening along the line of control. And that's been a tense and kind of simmering situation. Pakistan and India agreed to a kind of a ceasefire, a peace deal back in 2003. And that was the Jammu and Kashmir was an insurgency for something like 20 years. Pretty incredible. And actually, maybe this is interesting from an insurgency standpoint because there are a lot of lessons learned. And maybe next week, I'll talk more about that insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir. It's actually very, very interesting. And actually, it has some lessons learned here for the United States as well. So we'll do that next week. If you want to watch this show, go ahead and do that over at Out Front with Mike Shelby, the new YouTube channel, because that's where I'll be. I'll not be here next week for those of you just joining. At any rate, the Indian government has condemned Ilhan Omar's trip to this border region, and that they said it was a violation of India's territorial integrity that a member of U.S. Congress would make this unannounced trip to the region on the Pakistan side of the border. And after that, the State Department had to come out and say, this is not an official trip. This is not condoned. It's not sponsored by the U.S. government. They didn't say this, but we read this as she's effectively there as a private citizen. So Ilhan Omar causing a so far minor international incident right now. Now, the main thing I want to talk about today is a little more fallout, a little more clarification on this global security initiative. So yesterday, I dedicated pretty much the whole show to Chinese President Xi Jinping, who came out and said that he called for a global security initiative. And this is another kind of data point, maybe another landmark moment where China is trying to build a new international order, trying to build a new world order to replace the current one. I was reading the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The Chinese Foreign Ministry was asked about this new global security initiative by China. And here's what their spokesman had to say. Quote, "We are ready to have in-depth exchanges with all parties, blah, 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 and make joint efforts for seeking political settlement of various international and regional hotspot issues, meeting global challenges, and upholding world peace and common security." Every time they say something like this, it's always a dig at the United States. In essence, the United States is not doing any of these things, but China will do them in the future when China leads this new world order. And I bring this up because I read this sentence and I was immediately reminded. Last week, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said in a speech that China's place in the international system would be decided by how they respond to this Ukraine-Russia war. And she was basically saying that China would have more say or more influence or more weight in the international community if they were able to negotiate a peace settlement or work with the Russians to bring about an end to this Ukraine-Russia war. I guess I should say Russia-Ukraine war. And whether she realizes it or not, I don't know. I honestly have no idea what she's thinking. But she just asked China to take a global leadership role, whether she realizes it or not, because if China is, let's just say, I don't think this will happen, but let's just say China ends up taking some kind of credit for bringing a resolution to this Russia-Ukraine war. And now that's kind of international street cred. Now that says China is a major player beyond its own borders. Now China is engaged in negotiating foreign peace deals, which historically, since post 1945, something that the United States has done. And so again, we see another opportunity here for China to continue replacing the United States kind of piece by piece as the leader of the world. And I'm not saying that, again, this is not imminent, but it has already been happening for decades. It will probably continue to happen for at least for this decade. I also remember what Peter Zeihan talks about, and he says, look, China has a demographic inversion. They have a lot of older people, not enough younger people. And so he's I wouldn't say he's short China, but he's certainly not long China. And I was reading the speech again that Xi Jinping gave yesterday. And at the end of his speech, he said, oh, China's in such a great position. We're in a position to really have a lot of growth and development. And he's trying to make Southeast Asia the financial center of the world, working with these other Asian countries. And I'm highly interested to see what happens in China over the next couple of years, because one of the things we've been talking about is China may be facing its own 2008-esque financial meltdown. As a matter of fact, I just saw today where the Chinese central bank came out and said, we're going to continue to use monetary policy and fiscal policy to help stabilize the Chinese economy. And I don't want to say it's in collapse mode, but China's on recession watch already. And I think China could very well have their own massive debt problem. Talked about that before. We'll move on. I read this opinion piece over in Taipei Times this morning, which said that the writer of this article said, accused the United States of taking its eyes off of the Pacific Islands, but reminding everyone that China has not. And this is true. During our 2 decades long love affair with war in the Middle East, the United States, in terms of foreign policy, has neglected many parts of the world. And I don't say that as a promoter of American imperialism, but as long as we have the American empire, I would point out that the United States really has neglected. As a matter of fact, back in 2017 or maybe 2018, somewhere around there, is when Trump was in office, when we had then Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis go on this kind of whirlwind tour of South American countries and effectively telling Latin America, apologizing. Actually, maybe Pompeo said this when he was Secretary of State, but apologizing to Latin America. He says, look, I know you feel ignored, and that probably is true. And so China is exploiting this gap that has been left by U.S. foreign policy. Let's talk now about the Solomon Islands, what's going on there, because the Biden administration right now is playing catch up. The United States, the American empire, has neglected these parts of the world. I think the Biden administration understands that, trying to play catch up. A couple of days ago, I mentioned that the White House sent a delegation to the Solomon Islands to see if they couldn't talk them out of this security deal that these tiny little Solomon Islands made with China. Tiny island, really big deal. And it's actually of strategic importance now, because now there's talk about maybe China moving in military assets to the Solomon Islands. That would allow them to expand their force projection, which is obviously not what the United States wants. Definitely not considering a potential war between the United States and China, maybe sometime middle of this decade. I mean, that's only a few more years from now. So the White House is now talking about expediting the opening of a U.S. embassy in the Solomon Islands. They also want to strike these new maritime security deals with the Solomon Islands. And it kind of sounds like it's a day late and a dollar short. Also, Japan is sending a delegation to the Solomon Islands at the end of this month, trying to warn them, do not get into this deal with China. They will exert more influence than you are able to resist. And eventually the Solomon Islands, although maybe the Solomon Islands thinks, look, it's a good deal. We can't depend on the United States if there's a tsunami or typhoon or whatever is going to affect them. We can't depend on the United States to come and help us out. So we're going to depend on China. We're going to develop this deal with China. And so now we see the United States and Japan going there saying, look, you're going to regret this deal. You do not want to go down this road. And I'll talk about that. Actually, let's talk about this now, because now that this deal is signed, it was signed on Tuesday between China and the Solomon Islands, U.S. officials are warning that any efforts by the Solomon Islands to host Chinese military would be met with a response. As a matter of fact, here's a quote directly from the White House. Quote, if steps are taken to establish a de facto permanent military presence, power projection capabilities, or a military installation, they're talking about in the Solomon Islands, then the U.S. delegation noted that the United States would then have significant concerns and will respond accordingly. Now, I was reading an opinion piece over at the People's Daily. By the way, the People's Daily is the official mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. And I was struck by this quote, and I'll read it to you now. Quote, if the United States still chooses to stay stuck in the old days of colonial expansion and hold on to its antiquated Cold War mentality and zero-sum game mindset, not to mention being a troublemaker for peaceful development around the world, it will eventually end up in the dustbin of history. End quote. This is what was published in, actually, Ben, you want to throw that slide up there? I think I put that on a slide so everyone can read that themselves. That People's Daily slide I sent over to you. Maybe not. So at any rate, this quote does not get published in the People's Daily unless the Chinese Communist Party wants to express exactly that. So, again, just to follow up the end of that quote there, if the United States does not stop being a troublemaker, blah, 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 engaging in this antiquated Cold War mentality, then it will eventually end up in the dustbin of history. And that was from Shi Hui. I guess that's how you pronounce his name. He's a research analyst at a Chinese university or Chinese Learning Institute. This is important to point out because we do see a lot of anti-Chinese kind of sentiment here in the United States. I don't see anything that is on the same level. At least I have not read anything talking about putting China into the dustbin of history, but that's exactly what the Chinese are saying about the United States. What I see coming out from China is they just say, oh, we just want peace. We just want to live in a peaceful world, have prosperity. We don't know why the Americans are stuck in this Cold War mentality. We don't know why the United States is leading the world down this dark path. This is what they're saying publicly. Privately, they are manipulating the world, just like the United States has, just like the American empire has. They're doing it too, although they pretend that they're not doing it. They're trying to manipulate things to their advantage. They're engaging in intellectual property theft from American companies, stealing that technology, giving it to state-owned enterprises to reduce American competitiveness. And so all this talk about anti-American stuff that's coming out it's fake. The Chinese are doing the exact same thing. But I do want to point out here that if the Chinese are not actively plotting the end of the American empire, they're at least preparing for it, and they are telling us that they are preparing for it. I think I spent a majority of this week's shows talking about exactly how China is trying to do this right now. And I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that, because on the one hand, I am pro-America. I am an American. I'm one of the people who, I love my country, but I don't really love the government. And on the one hand, I say, well, if the American empire does fall, which I think it will, empires always fall. Historically, they've got about a 250-year lifespan, roughly 10 generations. And maybe the end of the American empire might be an opportunity for us who love this country to reestablish something better than what we have. Historically, I think we're likely to trade one tyranny for another. And that's what concerns me greatly. It will probably happen in my lifetime. It's probably going to happen in a lot of your lifetimes out there as well. And So this is another reason why I stress local, local, local. We absolutely have to be strengthening our local communities, building resiliency at the local level. We can do this through an area preparedness network, which I'm really big on. I talk about it almost every day. And in terms of preparing for this strategically, the best thing you can do is have a good local government. And if you don't have that, then you either need to make one or move to where you can toe the line and hold one up. And I also kind of say that as a, well, listen, once we move over to the new channel next week, I'll be maybe a lot more free to talk about other things, how I feel. But let's get to some questions now. Those are my notes for the day. We'll get to some questions here. During the fall of the Soviet Union and the Balkan Wars, the political parties all mobbed up. We have a few examples here in America. Do you see that expanding even more here in the United States? Here's what concerns me more than anything in the United States. Historically, in low intensity conflict, and we can see this in Ireland, we can see this in Iraq, especially see this in the fall of Yugoslavia, a lot of other countries where you have political parties who have a militant wing. And actually, Iraq's a very, very good example of this, because virtually all political parties there had a militant wing. And this is one thing that the left especially was talking a lot about back during 2016 and into the 2020 election. You know, they said, oh, the Proud Boys are the militant wing of the Republican Party, or, you know, X, Y, or Z far right group is the militant wing of the Republican Party. On the other side, you know, a lot of people said, oh, Antifa is the militant wing of the Democrat Party. And I actually disagree with that last part. I actually don't think Antifa is the militant wing of the Democrat Party. I think they have a lot of disdain for Democrats, who they call neoliberals. And you remember that spray painting in, was it Berkeley? I think it was in the Battle of Berkeley. You know, they said like capitalists first and the liberals are next, or something like that. But this is my major concern, or one of my primary concerns about the eventual collapse of the American empire and the expansion of low intensity conflict here at home is, I think historically we will see political parties who do have very public, or if they're not public, then kind of an open secret relationships between the political party and the militant wing. And you look at how the IRA and Sinn Féin kind of had that under the table agreement. This is how, and even we saw this in Iraq with Muqtada al-Sadr and Jaish al-Mahdi and the Sadrist movement, where you have a political party that's trying to get concessions and talks break down. And then all of a sudden the militant wing comes in and they launch an attack. They do, you know, something to remind the people sitting on the other side of the table, if you don't negotiate with us politically, if we can't reach a political settlement, then the violence will continue. And historically, that has been the norm in low intensity conflicts, where there is a political angle. And most insurgencies end in some kind of political concession, just like the FARC in Colombia. A bunch of those dudes were able to join the Colombian legislature in return for putting down their arms and rejoining society. Peace and reconciliation was like, I mean, that was kind of the key phrase. And for a long time in Iraq, is even with the Taliban, a lot of reconciliation efforts saying, look, let's make sure this war is over and you come back to the political process. We'll listen to you. We'll give you representation. But we've just got to stop the violence. And I hate to beat a dead horse, but I just will say this again. Historically, that's what happens in low intensity conflicts. And I'm afraid that's where the United States is headed. All right. Another question over here from the high side. Mike, is it possible to rebuild or remake the Boy Scouts? I know there are efforts to build something like the Boy Scouts under a different name, the Boy Scouting USA or whatever they're called. I doubt it, but I don't know a lot about them anymore. But I doubt it. What do you think the chances are that Russia uses tactical nukes in Ukraine? And what do you think NATO's response would be? Boy, we just talked about this the other day over on the high side, Dustin and I. I think it was in the, I guess it was in the, was it, I think it was the Thursday. Yeah, I think it was yesterday afternoon or yesterday morning, by the way. So yeah, go check that video out. That's like the last 5 to 10 minutes of my economic early warning brief yesterday. We talk about that. And I don't want to ruin that for non-subscribers because we always save the best stuff for subscribers. All right. Ben, can you help me look through the YouTube chat and let me know if there's any questions over there, if you don't mind. Yeah, guys, we'll do maybe a couple other questions. And just while we wait, locally, the best thing you can be doing right now is identifying the political and cultural and social landscape of your own local area and look at how susceptible your local area is to low intensity conflict, to political and social violence. Because it's coming. We're in a lull right now, and I don't want anyone to forget that all the plans, all the animosity, all the polarization that we saw in 2016 and 2020, that's all coming back. And it may not be November 22. We may see a minor heat up here. What I think is going to happen is if conventional wisdom is true and the Republicans do take the House and the Senate, then that's going to be kind of a reminder to a lot of people on the left. And they are going to feel a sense of urgency that they are maybe 2 years out from Republicans potentially sweeping the White House and keeping the House and the Senate from 2022 to 24. And Ron DeSantis, I don't know if you've been watching the news, but I just saw a CNN opinion piece about his imperial governorship. And they're already setting the stage that Ron DeSantis is the next Trump. And he's going to be worse than Trump because he's politically capable. And he's, so at any rate, he's not a total outsider. He knows how politics works. And he's going to get into the White House and he's going to be what everyone feared Trump would be, but he wasn't. After November 2022, if the GOP does take the House and the Senate, there's going to be a massive sense of urgency. All this stuff from 2016 and 2020 is coming right back. And it's going to smack everybody in the face in 2024. And I think things could be quite bad that year. Low intensity conflict. Thermals or night vision? Okay. Great question. It depends on your operational environment. It also depends on your mission. If you are in an urban area where there's a lot of ambient light, do you necessarily need night vision? If you're in a very rural area where there is zero ambient light, then I would say, first of all, I think night vision is just an absolutely incredible tool, and I think you need night vision, period. The question being thermals or night vision, it really kind of depends on what you're going to use it for. The great thing about I would say in general, night vision. If I had to choose one or the other, it would probably be night vision. But again, it kind of depends on my environment and how much ambient light there is. And, the thing about night vision is it will enable you to see in the night. The higher quality night vision you have, the better you're going to be able to see at night. One problem with night vision, the reason why they make IR flashlights is because when there's not a lot of moonlight out, for instance, when there's very little illumination, night vision capabilities are impaired because all they do is amplify ambient light. So then it kind of becomes, well, if you have night vision, then you probably need an IR flashlight as well. Thermals, on the other hand, they're great because in night vision, someone can have concealment or cover and you may not be able to see them. With thermals, you will be able to see their heat signature, even if they are behind some form of concealment. Or well, I guess I should say potentially. So another thing is night vision can be used through glass. Thermals cannot. You cannot use thermals driving down the road. So if you're trying to do stuff at night and you want to black out everything and drive a vehicle down a dusty dirt road at night, you can absolutely do that under nods. You cannot do that under thermal. So it kind of all goes back to your mission. And I know that's a popular question, but it really does depend what's your mission and what's your situation, what's your operational environment. Yeah, Ben, if you can, that's a tough question. Okay. Someone lives within several hours of the border. They're concerned when the food situation becomes a problem and we get increased migration up from the border, how can you quantify how bad these things could get? Well, one of the things that has driven so much migration from the Triangle region, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, is the drought. And so there's already been a drought and food problem there, and a gang problem, obviously. If this food problem gets as bad as I think it will be, then we could absolutely see lots of migrants coming to the United States where food is still relatively available. I mean, relative to the rest of the world, certainly relative to the third world countries south of the border here. So how to quantify that? I don't know. Probably into the millions. If things get bad enough, probably into the millions. Especially when official government policy is that no one's going to be when law enforcement has their hands tied to do anything about it. And when someone just said the other day, they started going off this long list. Their mother lives off Social Security for, I don't know, however, $800 a month, or I don't know, however much she got. And then the son was going through all these programs for illegal immigrants, talking about how much free stuff they get from the government, which is a lot more than $800 per month. So how is it that we can give all this money to illegals when we can't even take care of the own citizens that we have here already? And I'm going to resist going on a tirade here, but that's a great question. And as long as official government policy is to tie the hands of Border Patrol and make it so where that if you cross the border, you're here for the rest of your life if you so choose. And not only are you here for the rest of your life, but the government's going to take care of you until you get amnestized and become a voter. Man, I don't know how to quantify that, but it's got to be in the millions from here. Am I ever going to come to Portland or Seattle area for my intel classes? Man, I doubt it. Just to be perfectly honest with everybody, I'm kind of tired of traveling, man. Like, I got my own stuff going on here. I got a bunch of weekend projects, and me traveling to do a 2-day course on the weekend takes me out of work on Friday and Monday at a minimum. So really I'm missing like 4 days of work to teach a 2-day class. So it's real tough. So I've been trying to move more of my classes online, and I will. I don't know exactly when. It will probably be in May, maybe by mid-June at the latest. I'd like to have a basic intelligence collection class that's available online. A lot like the area intelligence course that I already have online. You can find that at www.grayzoneactivity.com. That's the training company. The area intelligence course is already up there, and I'm going to try to get a collection course on there next month. So I doubt I travel that far, just to be perfectly honest with you. All right. Have I heard of CAGWorks? Yeah, I may follow them on Instagram. I don't know any of those guys. All right. Any other questions here? If not, we will call it a day. All right, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for the support. By the way, I'm posting my show notes over on Patreon. So patreon.com/outfront if you want to support this show. Also get access to my show notes. There's one other question here over on the high side, which I'll get to right now. I've gotten through the area study course, or gotten through his area study, and started to make inroads with the neighborhood watch and city council. Any thoughts on what to prioritize in those areas? Okay, great question. Priority, always, in terms of priority, you have to defer to your intelligence requirements. What are your existing intelligence gaps? Okay, what are your existing priority intelligence requirements? What do you need to answer the fastest? Which answers or what information do you need the most right now? And then you look for placement and access. What people in general, or specifically which individuals would have this information. And then once you identify that, then you can go in and begin developing relationships in order to get the information to satisfy your requirements. So in a nutshell, that's the answer. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great weekend. That's going to do it for today's show. Dustin will be back on this channel with the Daily SA Monday morning starting at 9 a.m. And then he'll be back on the high side after that. I will be back on this show on Monday at 2 p.m. Central Time over on the new Outfront YouTube channel. I will not be broadcasting over here. Again, this is going to allow me to be a little more frank and candid with the things that I believe personally, politically, philosophically, so on. And all I'm doing is just taking any political bias away from this Forward Observer channel, so Forward Observer can continue being just the facts, non-biased. And if we do have opinions, we'll let you know, but we'll be sure to tell you these are our opinions. These are not the straight facts. All right. We can talk about LoRa communication devices next week. Everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. And until next time, be well and stay out front.